We may get a stock market crash. Um, Not anything to do necessarily with the campaign, but the economy is probably in a recession. There are more and more signs of that. We're either in one or we're very close to one. We may get a stock market crash. Not anything to do necessarily with the campaign, but the economy is probably in a recession. There are more and more signs of that. We're either in one or we're very close to one. It's coming, but the stock market, with some of these um, AI companies, semiconductor manufacturers, OpenAI is not a public company, but they're kind of a leader in this. But Microsoft, Google, NVIDIA, and others are Wall Street is beginning to catch on to the fact that, hey, you guys are spending billions upon billions of dollars developing AI, buying all these super chips, using all this energy, et cetera, and no results. Like you're creating the models, but you're not driving any revenue. So it's just a black hole. They're flushing money down. That could cause a correction. And the concentration in the stock market right now is so high, where 5 or 6 companies, or the Magnificent Seven, if you want, are about 60 or close to 70% of the market cap of the entire S&P. If one or more of them went down and took others with it, the whole market would collapse. That has nothing to do with the election, but don't rule it out.
Yeah.
I said we're gonna get a surprise today. It's kind of been leaked, but late today, RFK Jr. is going to suspend his campaign and endorse Trump. So I don't know whether it'll be a joint event, but that's happening. That's been kind of leaking out there for the past week. The most interesting twist on that is that Trump said, "Yeah, thank you, welcome aboard, thanks for the endorsement. By the way, he'll make RFK Jr. head of the CIA."
Hmm.
I worked at the CIA for 10 years. I can, there's only so much I can say, but that is an interesting one. But RFK Jr. would want to get to the bottom of the assassination of his uncle and his father. And there was some CIA role. I'm not saying they did it, but, there's a lot more than the public knows.
Right.
At Trump sentencing, he has not been sentenced in the hush money trial. That's coming up in I think it's September 13th. I could be off by a day or two, but we got to get back to Juan Merchan, the super biased judge. His daughter is making millions off of Democratic fundraising and Democratic campaigning. She's a consultant to the Democrats. She's making millions of dollars from the Harris campaign, and her father is the judge in the Trump hush money trial. Any decent judge would have recused himself, like, hey, yeah, nothing fishy here, but I just isn't right. That's what a good lawyer and a good judge would do. Judge hasn't done that. He's a Trump hater. Um, he could sentence Trump to 130 years in jail. I don't think he will. That's not my forecast, but he could. We got 32 felony convictions at 4 years each. And if you do them what's called consecutively, that would be 128 years in jail. He could sentence them to 4 years in jail and put him in jail, put him in Rikers Island, in 2 weeks. He might do that. Again, don't rule it out. I think what he's likely to do is say, I'm such a nice guy. I'm not going to put you behind bars. I'm going to put you under house arrest with an ankle bracelet pending appeal. Meaning Trump would basically be confined to Mar-a-Lago with an ankle bracelet, but he's somehow supposed to run for president. I think at that point, Trump's lawyers would go to the Supreme Court and ask for some emergency decree or injunction saying, no, you can't do that. Yeah, you have jurisdiction, but you're interfering with a presidential campaign. You're interfering with the 14th Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment, a lot else. And we're going to set Trump free. But imagine that. Imagine Trump being under house arrest with an ankle bracelet in 2 weeks. That is very likely to happen. What else? I have a little list here of I call it wild cards, but October surprises.
Yeah.
One, there could be another assassination attempt. I mean, the Secret Service let that assassination happen. I'm not saying they pulled the trigger. I'm saying that they had more than enough information to know what was happening and they let it happen. In that world, anything can happen. So sadly, we can't rule that out. And one last thing, we're all going to stay up late on November 5th. Now, I said the voting starts in about a week, which is true, continues through September and October, but they don't actually count the votes. They might count the ballots, but they can't like open them. They can't count the votes until the polls close on election day, and then we go from there. We'll all get the results. This could take days. We're not necessarily going to know on election night. The Democrats cheat like crazy, and the Republicans kind of learned their lesson in 2020 and to some extent 2022. They've got an army of 500 lawyers. I hope they pick good ones, and tens of thousands of volunteers. I remember in 2020, they had poll watchers. My mother was a political activist. She was a poll watcher. I actually was a poll watcher once upon a time. And you just basically stand there and look over the shoulder of the person counting and make sure they're not cheating. But they say, well, the poll watchers have to stand 10 feet away because of COVID. Well, I'm wearing glasses, but, I can't see, I can't read fine print 10 feet away. Nobody can. And the point is the poll watchers couldn't do their jobs. And then they said, around midnight, okay, everybody out, we're done. And then when everyone left, they shipped in more ballots at 3 a.m. and started counting them. This is all on tape. This is not, conspiracy stuff. So, so the point is, with this many paper ballots but the Republicans challenging a lot more in a much better position to challenge the Democratic ballot box stuffing, this may get to court sooner than we think. And this is on day, kind of, you go back to November, December 2000. Bush versus Gore, they didn't decide that until mid-December. The election, I forget the exact election day, it was in November, but the Supreme Court didn't rule on Bush versus Gore until I believe it was around December 10th or somewhere around there. It's a good 5 or 6 weeks. You could have something similar, and you get a lot. And the courts hate these. They hate these cases. They don't want to be involved in them, but they may have no choice. The issues are so great, and the misconduct is so egregious, and they kind of punted on this in 2020. They may have no choice but to get involved. You could litigation, but it may take weeks to actually count the votes.
They're either lying to us or they're grossly incompetent. Here's why. This number that Trump referred to, and by the way, he was exactly right. Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce, didn't know what the Labor Department was saying and said it was fake news or whatever. Trump was exactly right. But this is an annual adjustment. It came out to about 818,000 jobs that the White House said were created, but were never created. Those jobs disappeared. But this had been accumulating monthly. So every month they come out with an employment report, and they tell you how many jobs were created. But they also revised the prior months. So in May, they revised April. In July, they revised June, and so forth. And every single revision for a year was downward. So when you look at that, you say, well, okay, if somewhere up and somewhere down, a little bit of statistical noise, that's random, okay, it evens out. But when every single month is down, which it was, meaning every month they said the prior month, we didn't create as many jobs as we told you at the time, even though that's not in the headlines anymore. There's a systematic problem there. Now, whether it's a statistical model problem or deliberately misleading or fading the numbers or whatever, I mean, it's one's worse than the other, but it doesn't matter. They were wrong about the jobs. Now, it gets worse than that, Peter, because what I'm talking about is called the employer survey. The government actually does 2 job surveys every month. One is the employer survey. They call companies to say, how many people did you hire? But there's something else called the household survey, where they call individual homes, on a survey type basis, and they say, did you get a job or did you lose your job, et cetera. Now, those 2 numbers should be the same. They're not. There's always some difference, and that's to be expected. But they should be the same. But they've been way off, meaning
which one's higher, Jim? Jim, which one's higher?
The employer survey is much higher, but sometimes as many as close to 1 million jobs. The household survey has been showing in certain months losses of 600,000 jobs, when the employer survey is showing gains of about 250,000 jobs.
So I want to run a theory. I want to run a theory by you. My theory is that those phantom jobs are held by illegal aliens who are less likely to report on surveys. And if that's true, it shows how all these illegal aliens flooding into our labor market are actually stealing jobs. Thoughts?
Well, first of all, that's the theory, but there's actually a lot of evidence to back that up. The same surveys I'm talking about show that many of these jobs that they claim are created, again, a lot of them weren't, but many of the jobs that were created are going to illegal aliens, and they're predominantly part-time jobs. Now, look, there's dignity in all work, so if you got a part-time job, good for you. But these are people who want full-time jobs. So first of all, they're not full-time jobs; they're part-time jobs. They're overwhelmingly going to illegal aliens. And as far as and yes, they are taking American jobs. You're absolutely right about that, Peter, and there's evidence to back that up. But in terms of the gap that I was describing earlier, a long time series shows that when the household survey and the employer survey diverge, which they have, the household survey is usually right. They have to converge at some point, and what happens is the employer survey starts to drop like a rock, and it converges with the household survey. What that means is not only have we been overstating jobs, or has there been a gap, but that correction is going to be a severe decline in employment and much higher unemployment. That's apart from the statistical side of it, not to get too deep in the weeds, that's a sign of a recession. And there are plenty of other indicators of that. Again, the Fed, Jay Powell just gave a speech in Jackson Hole. Fine, they're going to cut interest rates in September. We kind of knew that, but he made it official. But there's nothing. Interest rate cuts are not stimulus. Everyone's going to call it stimulus. Bloomberg and CNBC. The Fed's going to stimulate. Interest rate cuts are not a form of stimulus. Low interest rates are associated with recessions and depressions. I talked to Ben Bernanke about this. Interest rates were rock bottom during the Great Depression. They were zero.
Jim, I gotta push back a little bit on that. I mean, look, monetary policy. When you lower interest rates, you're going to be lowering credit card debt, so people have more money. You're going to be lowering how mortgage. I mean, it's true that sometimes they lower interest rates too slowly, and you wind up in recessions and depressions. But we can have this debate, and I think it's an interesting one about whether a recession's coming. I'm not seeing that yet because the Harris-Biden agenda continues to pump so much friggin' money that we don't have into the economy. I mean, it's the biggest and longest sustained Keynesian overstimulus in the history of our country, and I think it's designed basically to ensure the reelection. What they thought was Biden, but now it's Harris. So I wouldn't be thinking that certainly there's not going to be any recession before that election day. We'll get plenty of inflation, but not. I don't know.
Yeah, Peter, we could debate the stimulus effect of lower interest rates, but we're in total agreement that fiscal policy, meaning deficit spending, more debt, does produce some kind of stimulus, does produce GDP. Now, it comes at a very high cost, which is slow growth.
Does produce GDP. I'm not sure. I mean, it does. The interesting thing about the fiscal stimulus of Biden-Harris is that so much of it is on low return investments or no return investments, the woke stuff. So even though you get some stimulus, you're not getting anywhere near what you otherwise would if it was targeted on public investment that actually had a high return. Thoughts?
Well, first of all, that's exactly right. By the way, there's a ton of evidence that shows the following. The Keynesian multiplier, so-called, is real, but it declines as the debt to GDP ratio goes up. So at a 30% debt to GDP ratio, which is very comfortable, you can borrow $1, spend $1, and maybe get $1.25 or $1.30 of GDP. But at 90%, you borrow $1, you spend $1, you're lucky to get $1 of GDP. You're spending $1 and you barely get $1 of GDP. We're at 135%. At that level, you borrow $1, you spend $1, you might only get 60 cents of GDP, meaning that the payoff is not even the dollar that you borrowed, and meanwhile, the debt to GDP ratio is getting worse.